Hello and welcome to part 2 of the Talking Bollocks Christmas special. Yes, it is me. It is Howard H. Smith, lead singer of Acid Rain, stand-up comedian, yada yada yada. I ain't going to do that today. No, whatever, you know. You've heard all that rubbish before from me, haven't you? And the same about Patreon and everything else. Fucking hell, sign up if you want. There's a support this podcast link in the description. Click that, take you there, you get loads of stuff, etc, etc. This particular podcast is all about giving you something interesting to get your ears around between Christmas and New Year. And so here it is. You had the first Christmas special with Beth Rawls, which I hope you enjoyed. This one is very much focused on good old thrash metal, as you already know, because you know who the guest is, you've read the description, so you know what's coming up. And to take a break with tradition, what I would like to do is crack on straight away. I'm not going to do the normal jibber jabber about the bloody news and all of that and what everybody's doing and all of that crap, because, well, I'm kind of not going to. It's just not my thing today. On this particular day, I want to get this podcast to you guys, and I want you to just be able to dig straight in. So, without further ado, no fucking about, let's get on with it. I was so pleased to get Randy on the show. He was very generous with his time, and it was an absolute pleasure to talk to somebody who was at the forefront of thrash metal, and most importantly, the sound of thrash metal and making thrash bands sound like thrash bands. This is a guy who knew what he was doing. Every single record of his that I own sounds great, and this was fantastic. Really enjoyed it. Hope you do too. This is Randy and I talking just a few weeks ago.
Hello, it's Randy.
Hello, Randy. It's Howard.
Hi, Howard.
Hello there. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
Excellent. Are you? Is all the various madness calmed down near where you are?
Mostly. I'm 99.9% sure that everything's okay.
Yeah, I mean, you can't have the United States of America being held to ransom by one man. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I guess that's one way of looking at it, yeah.
So look, first of all, thank you so much for doing this. I really do appreciate it. When I first tweeted you, I had my fingers crossed for any kind of reply, even if it was just a like, go away and leave me alone. So thanks for coming on and doing this. I really do appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome.
Thank you. Now, I wanted to go back to your very beginnings, because you started out playing in punk bands yourself, if I'm correct.
No, I started out playing in basically what we call the top 40 band, but we were playing rock music in clubs in Orange County. And I had an original band, and we were rock. We were kind of like the bands of the late 70s, Fleetwood Mac, Heart, things, something like that. And I built a studio in my parents' garage with an 8-track Tascam machine, and we recorded some demos, and I ended up recording some punk rock friends of mine, and they told their friends about it, and that's how I got started with the punk rock, was recording the punk rock. But as far as playing, I wasn't playing in the punk bands. I was playing in rock bands. Right.
Okay. And what made you? I mean, I'm sat here as somebody who, wanted to get a band together. What made you have that same kind of inspiration to say, I'm going to put some Tascam machines in my parents' garage and build a studio?
Well, I had a songwriting partner, Linda Schultz, and we wanted to get a record deal. So you need demos. So I was making my own demos. The first ones we did on a 4-track TX machine in an apartment. And then, it just sort of escalated from there. It's like, okay, well, I figured out how to make this work. Now, what's the next thing? I need more tracks. So my parents were there, and they said I could use the garage. So it was like, okay, let's get the 8-track machine and stick it in the garage, and then let's see what we can do in there. And that's when my friends heard about what I was doing, and one of them I played with in a rock band in St. Louis, and he was now doing this punk rock band. He said, "Hey, will you record my band?" And I said, "Sure." So I just wanted to make my own demos.
Right.
And,
okay.
I just got into it. I really, I love the idea of multi-track recording and and trying to make a record.
Yeah. And so whilst making those demos, did you find yourself kind of falling in love with the process as well?
Yes. Yeah. I really enjoyed the recording process, and it was always exciting and fun,
Yeah, that's
so, yes.
that's really interesting. That's really interesting because I know there's definitely something magical that happens in the studio when it's right and it's going well. To be honest, there's something magical when it's all going wrong as well. It's just a black magic. But I can see how that could become addictive, because I know when I'm in the studio, it's like it's another world. There's invariably very few windows, and you work odd hours, and it's a complete other kind of existence, isn't it?
It is. It's but when you get it right, it's incredibly rewarding. And now I can look back on those on the 80s and early 90s, and I've got a stack of records over here. They're documents, like a movie, or a book. It's a document of what happened back then, and it's a good document, and it's it's like it's a snapshot of time. It's there for people to check out forever.
Well, you're absolutely right. I have some subscribers to this podcast, and I've got some of their questions for you later on. And there was a great deal of surprise and excitement at the fact that you were coming on, because as much as we were all inspired, I was inspired, to form bands and things that have gone on to inform my entire life. The way those records sound is just as important, and the fact that you've been responsible for some of the genres, and well, I say the genre, for many genres, classic albums, is quite incredible, because you started out on what is an absolute classic album, the first Suicidal albums. That's the kind of your entry point into sort of thrash metal, hardcore, crossover. That was kind of like, was that the first real thing that you got involved with, that was where you became aware that, right, this is actually an album on a record label?
There was there was one record before that got me started, and it was a compilation of punk bands from Orange County, Long Beach, and LA. So the whole LA area, but the greater LA area. So Long Beach and Orange County were a little bit separate from the LA scene. And Steve Sinclair and Ron Gowdy, guys that went on to become record execs at indie labels like Combat and Enigma.
I know Steve Sinclair.
Yeah, Steve Sinclair and Ron Gowdy were the guys. They pulled together all these bands, and they asked me to do the recording, and we did 10 bands, I think, or 11 bands, and they included Social Distortion and 45 Grave and super heroines, and just a bunch of really good punk bands that were starting out there in 1980. And it was Lisa Fancher at Frontier Records, who's I don't, you must be familiar with her label. They're a really, she's a definitive punk label. She's been around forever. She's still there. Just the oldest punk label in the world. It has to be. And she heard Christian Death. Christian Death was also on that compilation album, and she heard that and gave me a shot at the Suicidal Tendencies.
Right.
So it was really Hell, and that compilation was called Hell Comes to Your House, and it's a great compilation, by the way. It's a really good record, and that got me into Suicidal, and then Suicidal got me elsewhere.
Yeah, and I mean, what a great album to be a part of. I mean, that was an album that definitely sort of helped form my tastes in my formative years. Was it any different? I mean, were you coming in engineering on that?
Yeah. I was an engineer on the Suicidal Tendencies record, and the producer was the guy, excuse me, who did the photos, and he hadn't really produced any records, so it was pretty much Lisa and I that did the production, and so I was really responsible for the sound of that record, and yeah.
I can't think of anything. I can't think of anything more 80s and punk than the guy who was producing it was also doing the photos. So yeah, right. That sounds about right.
Right. No, he's the guy that took the famous picture on the cover where they're hanging upside down.
Well, that is worth his involvement alone, just taking that one picture.
No, I'm saying he's a cool guy, but he didn't know a lot about making records.
So when did you kind of graduate from engineering to producing?
Well, I got into the engineering business full time, and I did a stint as a staff engineer at a recording studio called Music Grinder on Melrose.
Oh yes,
and it was a great studio, and I did a bunch of amazing sessions there. I worked with Toto and Jean-Luc Ponty and Alan Holsworth and all of these amazing artists, and got a great experience. But it turned out that the owner, Ron, didn't appreciate me talking to the client so much. I was real excited about the music, and I would end up chatting with the musicians and talking about what we were doing, and assistant engineers were supposed to be seen and not heard. And it just, I don't know, it just worked out that I was always, he kept stumbling upon me chatting up the artist, and we weren't supposed to do that. So anyway, he fired me, and not because I was a bad assistant, but because he thought I was a producer and an artist and needed to go and do that, and that I wasn't well suited to be an assistant engineer. So I went out on my own, and a lot of the bands, the way I saw it, the bands that were being recorded by the thrash bands didn't need producers really. They just needed a good engineer that would translate what they wanted to get the sound that they wanted, and we didn't need to change their songs or work on the arrangements too much or anything like that. We just needed to document them, and that was my style as a producer. It was very documentary, and it was basically the record companies who knew me just sort of gave me the handle and said, here, why don't you just do the whole thing? You produce this, and it went from there. So the reason I got into it is because I got booted out of being an assistant engineer at the nice studio and was sort of forced to. I was forced to go out on my own and try to do it, and it turned out to be easier to get the gig as the producer, and that's just the way it worked.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, I was just sat here nodding along with what you were saying as well, because back in those early years, thrash was a completely unknown musical force, and as you can hear on many of those albums as well, when they're in the hands of people who didn't know what they're doing, they're still using old school tricks like covering everything in reverb to try and make this to try and make it sound good. And what you needed was to listen to the bands, because the bands knew exactly how they wanted to sound.
That's correct. So again, my philosophy about recording, I was very documentary. I always assumed that the bands were the best experts on how they should sound, and listened to them and worked really hard to accomplish what they wanted. And that was actually informed from the artist point of view. You could go back when I was songwriting and making demos. At one point, my partner and I got signed to a management deal, which was really a record deal that they were going to sell to a record company. And part of that management deal, we did demos. And I hated the demos. I hated what they, we went into the 24-track studio with professional producer and all this stuff, and I hated it. They changed our sound. It didn't sound, they just missed it.
Yeah.
And from that point on, I said, I'm going to be the guy that's the recording engineer. I'm going to get what the musicians want. So if you're an artist and a musician and you come in the studio with me, you're going to like what comes out of those speakers. I'm not going to tell you what you need to sound like. You're going to tell me, and we're going to work together and get it. So I'd had the experience of going in the studio with a producer that said, here's what you need to do, and here's what we're going to do with your songs. Here's what we're going to do with your sound to make you whatever. Yeah. Commercial, right? To make you sell.
And like you said, that's just it's ripping everything apart, and I guess that must have been that is a very, very important experience, because that informed pretty much the rest of your career.
It did. It was like it set the imperative. The most important thing was the artist knows what they want to sound like, and the artist is the best expert on that. Not the record company, not me, not some critic, not anybody else. The artist. These are the guys that know what the sound is supposed to be. Listen to them, and the bands love that. That's why that's why I got gigs. I got a lot of gigs because the bands were very happy with that.
But when you look at the philosophy of record labels, especially at the time, that it was almost the exact opposite. You were given a producer because the producer was basically an extension of the record company, and he was going to make the record that the label wanted, and you were basically going and doing the exact opposite.
Right, and that continued. There are very bad stories about bands that made records with producers that didn't sound like the band, and it didn't happen. So anyway, yes.
Yeah, and
that was not the way it went with record companies. When we started, there was no thrash music. It didn't exist. These guys were the people who invented it, and we didn't know exactly what we were going to get. It just kind of manifested itself from where they were coming from.
But you were also involved in two two of the most significant death metal albums around that time as well, with obviously Possessed, Seven Churches, and a couple of years later Death, Scream, Bloody Gore.
That's right.
When you were, I mean, I know Possessed were incredibly young at the time. When you were dealing with Possessed and later on Death, were you able to see, hang on, this is going somewhere just slightly different, this is going to break out as a genre of its own, or did you just think it was just going to just more thrash but just slightly darker?
I knew that they were much more extreme, but yeah, I saw it as just a more extreme version. But I took the same approach. I said, I'm going to get the sound that Possessed wants, and I'm going to get the sound that Death wants. And trust me, those guys knew what they were doing. They came in the studios incredibly prepared and knew exactly where they wanted to go with stuff, and they were the ones that came up with the sound. That's not a Randy Burns sound. That's Possessed and that's Death. Those are the guys that did that. I just helped them get it on tape.
And like you said, that's why you were getting a lot of gigs as well, because you kept churning out great sounding albums. The bands were happy, and all goes back to the label and all goes out and sells. And we're in a time where when these albums are dropping, everybody is incredibly excited. And but you were dipping your toe still in hardcore. I mean, two of my favourite all-time hardcore bands would be two bands who put two albums out and were both vastly different from each other, which was DBC, Dead Brain Cells, and the Crumbsuckers. Because you basically recorded two hardcore a hardcore debut with both bands, and then they both went off and did something completely crazy and different on the second album.
Yeah. Well, they're definitely good bands. The other one in there that was that what I would throw into that group would be Ludacris.
Oh, of course, another yes, and another of my favorite. I mean, I've got all of these albums. Immaculate Deception. Actually, I managed to pick that up as a double.
Exactly.
Got that as a double disc with Power Trip, which was remastered a few years ago, and still sounds absolutely fucking great, by the way. But how do you treat? And I'm thinking more sort of DBC and Crumbsuckers. So you go in, you do those first albums with them both, and they're both great, hardcore records, and then you go back with Crumbsuckers, and the second album is completely different, and DBC is almost like a sort of sci-fi, almost kind of Rush adventure. That must have been quite a surprise from your point of view to see how they changed musically, directionally in such a short space of time.
No, I don't remember it that way. I just went with the bands, and again, it was always the band that was the guiding force. So
right, yeah.
I'd follow them wherever they went, and again, my basic principle was the bands are the best experts on how they want to sound. Don't mess with them.
Yeah.
Don't interrupt them. Don't get in their way. Go with the flow. Figure out what they want to do and go there. And it's their sound. It's not me creating this sound. It's just me capturing it.
Yeah, and well, that kind of sort of takes us on to I guess your major calling card, which would be P Cells, but who's buying? How did it come about? How did it come about? You ended up working on that.
Well, I actually was taking a break from engineering and producing. I left Hollywood and went out and lived with my parents again out in Antelope Valley, out in the desert. And I was studying computer science and going to Cal State Northridge, and was a full-time computer science major when that record came up. And I was just kind of burned out on Hollywood and the record making. It's a cynical business. I mean, it's a hard business to be in.
Yeah.
And anyway, I needed to take a break from it, and I did. And my friend Steve Sinclair called me and said, "Look, I got this band, and you're the guy that needs to do it." And I said, "Steve, I'm not working right now. I'm going to school, and I'm doing this computer science thing. It's very interesting." And he said, "Look, just go listen to the band and tell me what you think." So I did. I drove down to L.A. and went to their rehearsal studio, this big, giant. There were these big buildings with like 100 studios in them in downtown L.A. And I went in there, and this one of these little rooms, and they played their set, and I was just blown away. I mean, sitting there, listening to them run through their set, I went, "This is it. This is the hit record. This is the one. This is going to be huge." And I quit school the next day and moved back to Hollywood and made the record.
Wow, that's...
By the way, that's the only time I've ever had that feeling. It's the only time I've ever sat there and went, "This is it. This is going to be huge. Everybody's going to want to hear this one. This is a great record." You know, I listen to a lot of bands. I like the bands when I go hear them, but and I was right. You know, I was right that one time.
Well, you certainly were. I mean, that's I mean, do you look back that? Do you look back now and think, "Wow, I really," the confidence of youth, where you just think, "Right, I'm going to put my entire future in the hands of working on this one album"?
It was just obvious that, it was so exciting. They were so good. They were so tight. And the songs were so intense that, you couldn't ignore it. It was like,
yeah,
it's like, these guys are on fire. I need to do this. I can go to school anytime. This band's only good. This opportunity is right now. So, yeah, I didn't think very much about it. It was an easy, simple decision. I didn't sweat over it all. I mean, I made the decision sitting in the room, listening to them go through their set. I mean, you probably were, halfway through the set, and I'd already made up my mind. And I literally moved to Hollywood the next day.
And were the band aware of the commitment that you've made?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't think I mentioned it to them that was the case.
You never know how that might go down. Hang on, we don't want a computer science major doing our album.
Well, I hadn't been out of Hollywood, but a couple of months. So, it wasn't like I was gone from the scene for a long time. I just took a little break and found myself doing something that I thought was interesting and stimulating and in a different way. I don't know. I'm a strange guy. I like calculus. I thought it was really fun. So I don't know. It was just different. But once I was presented with the band, Steve convinced me to go listen to them, and that's all I needed to do.
And so that's how so many stories in the music business start, is somebody convincing somebody else to go and see someone, to go and listen to somebody. It's that moment. It's that moment, and where someone says, "Yeah, okay, I'll go," and that's when great things happened. What was it like?
Steve Sinclair and I had done a number of records. We'd done a bunch of records at Combat.
Yeah.
We I don't know, maybe we did 6 or 8 or 10. I don't know. It was something on that kind of scale. And so we had a history. So when he told me, look, you've got to go and listen to this band. You're the guy that needs to do it. This is the right record for you. And they're just unbelievable. You have to go see them to believe it. And so I did. He was right. Steve Sinclair was a great A&R guy. He signed a ton of great bands.
Well, I'm. Do you know what? That I'm going to take that as a potentially as a compliment, because he tried to sign my band back in the day when he was running
really?
the mechanic. Yeah, when he was running the Mechanic imprint through MCA.
Right.
And
yeah. You guys turned him down.
Well, our manager did, but on the understanding that he said, it's that old line, isn't it? He said, well, he's offered us a deal, but that's based on the demos that we've played him. I want to go back with the completed album, and that will increase our bargaining power. And of course, by the time he went back with the completed album, thrash had already moved on to basically it started kind of fading away, and all of us, and it was Steve's turn to turn down even a meeting with our manager. So we live to regret that.
I think so. He was a good A&R guy. He was a good record exec, and if he would have signed you and believed in you, he would have, he would have pushed you. So anyway, that's an interesting one. What was the name of your band?
Acid Rain, but the Rain is spelled REIGN. No, that would have been great, man. We'd have been label mates with Voivod and Violence. It would have been marvelous. But instead, what I got to do was tour with quite a few people that you work with. Well, probably the band we toured with the most was Nuclear Assault, who you basically were in-house producer for those guys, weren't you?
We did a number of records, yeah, and all of those records had Casey McMacken on it. I need to get Casey's name out there. Casey was another engineer who worked at the Music Grinder with me. Yeah. And at some point when I was producing, I started seeing the advantage of having an engineer, so I could focus more on the flow of the session and listening to the performances and just have a little more bandwidth by not being attached to the knobs. And Casey was a brilliant recording engineer and really co-equally responsible for the sound that we got for Nuclear Assault and Megadeth and a lot of those bands. He doesn't get enough airtime. He was co-pilot and a really good one. So I just want to mention him. Yeah. And I remember, and he was there for all of the Nuclear Assault stuff. That again. These are all my. It's talking to you is like literally everything you worked on was in my record collection. Absolutely, all of it. And there's something about. I was very fortunate, and I was in the right place at the right time, and I knew the right people like Steve Sinclair to get all these bands. I mean, there was a lot of luck involved with this, and a lot of just being in the right place at the right time to get all this to happen. I mean, we did good work. I did good work, but there's definitely some luck involved in getting that set of bands back to back. You know what I mean? It's a little bit remarkable.
Well, it is a bit remarkable, especially when you look back on it now. But I have to say, one of my favourite phrases is that you make your own luck. And I think, there was clearly Steve Sinclair on the phone to you saying, look, I want you to go and listen to these guys. I want you to do the record, i.e., peace sells, but who's buying? You've earned that phone call. You've earned that right through the work that you've done previously and knowing how happy the bands are. And I know what you mean by it feels like luck, but I just think the quality of the work that you were doing was attracting all the right names, and I mean, again, one of the groundbreaking productions that you were responsible for my part, and in fact I even actually I reviewed the album for Metal Hammer when it came out, because I was doing some bits and pieces for them as a kind of guest reviewer, was Extreme Aggressions by Creator, because that was, production wise and sound wise, that was kind of next level. No one saw that coming. Was that a real conscious decision on behalf of the band? I guess you're going to say again that, look, it's all about the band, but it just sounded so different. But it also it was clean, but it was heavy. It was intense. And to this day, I still think it is an absolutely fantastic sounding record.
Yeah, no, that one didn't have Casey on it. That one was just me going back. I was the engineer and the producer on that one. Well, Creator, again, yeah, they're an extraordinary band, and they were totally ready to do that record. I mean, they were. I think, again, it's catching the band at the right place, the right time in their career, at the right moment. They were peaking in a way. They had a peak right then, and in terms of just being tight and having great songs and really having a defined way of playing. They had a style, they had a sound, they had a thing, and yeah, we did a good job of capturing it. I don't know. I like that record, and that's one I particularly like. But yeah, I went into it like I always do. So I don't know. I didn't set out to make a different sounding record. I just wanted to make one that was good.
Yeah. And how do you feel about all of the various remasters coming out? And of course, when we talk about, there's remasters and there's also some remixes. Obviously, Peace Cells has come out a number of times, either remastered or remixed, and funnily enough, Extreme Aggression as well, which I picked up as a remaster. Do you keep abreast of all of these things and give them a listen when they come out?
No, I don't. I certainly, if it's the remix, like the Megadeth mixes, I've definitely heard all of that. But not necessarily each remaster or something like that. I don't go back and listen to it and critique it and stuff like that. Ultimately, now I've just in the past few months started getting back into working and mixing. I've built a studio in my garage here in Portland, Oregon.
History is repeating itself.
Now that means an acoustically treated room, right? I've got an acoustically treated room where the low end is good, and I've got some decent monitors in there, and a big computer with a bunch of software on it to make it sound like a console. And it's basically,
Yeah.
And so I can mix in a box now, and it sounds good. I figured out how to do that, and I'm actually looking for work. So if anybody out there wants their stuff mixed by me, I'm open for business. I haven't done a lot of advertising yet, so but I'm getting ready to. Anyway,
no, that's good.
Peace Cells is the one record that I would like to get another shot at remixing. And I haven't brought it up with them yet. I want to wait until I have a lot of current product out there that shows that I'm good at this mixing in the box thing. And I think people would be interested in that, a modern mix of that record. I mean, there's a whole bunch of, they've got so many different versions of that record that, you know, I think they could sell another one.
Yeah, with I for one would love to hear the the 2020-2021 Randy Burns mix of Peace Cells, but also the genre of thrash metal and metal. People pay huge attention to the quality of the production on their albums. You know, I do think it's something that is incredibly unique. I mean, we put a new album out last year, first album for 29 years, and the amount of people commenting on the production, the producer was just amazed. He said, I've got more comments. You know, I've been mentioned in more reviews by, having done your album than the rest of my career put together. And I think that's because, thrash fans, metal fans, we are, a lot of us are real audiophiles, and we really, really appreciate the actual, just the quality of the sounds and the way something is put together. Is that something that you were ever conscious of?
Oh yeah, and I'll say our approach, and I'm talking about working with Casey.
Yeah.
We took what was kind of known in the industry then as sort of the traditional British approach to things. We were kind of purist, and the basic rule is that you want to put the stuff on the tape such that when you play it back, you can set the console. You can just push the faders up flat, and it's going to sound good. So you don't put anything on there that isn't record quality, and that was our phrase. That's record quality. That's good enough. That's a good enough sound. We can go with that. And we knew we were cutting edge in terms of the drum sounds, and I had an approach to this. I rented drums from a drum tech. His name was Drum Doctor, and he brought in these kits, and he would duplicate the drummer's kit exactly. So if the drummer had 2 kicks, 2 floors, 3 toms, and 4 cymbals, he would have exactly the same rig. Only his stuff was perfect for recording, and he did everybody's sessions in town. He was over on the Toto sessions, he was over on the Michael Jackson sessions, he was over on all the major label stuff. He was the drum tech that was doing. He'd have 10 kits out in any one day. Anyway, and then he would come in and tune them, and we would get sounds that way. So when we started, where we started sounded fantastic. Yeah. And then we would, try to up it from there. And he would come in and listen to what we had, and he would say, "Can I get a sample of that? Can I sample that kick drum over there?" So we really focused on and trying to get really, really clean and powerful sounds out of this stuff. And we were totally into the sound and the fact that we were creating these good records by making everything sound really good. Yeah, we were totally focused on that.
And also, I mean, that is that's great to hear, and you'll be pleased to know that that's certainly our philosophy still to this day, because ultimately, if you start out with sounds that sound like you say record quality, when you get just the raw sounds to that level, without any without anything, it's just the basic sounds, then further down the line that everything is going to stand up and everything is going to sound good together.
Right. We didn't spend a lot of time mixing. We pushed the faders up, put a little reverb on stuff, and get some levels, and that was it. We didn't have to muck around with stuff. We recorded it the way it was supposed to sound.
Exactly.
Yeah. So now looking back at it, again, I would love to have a crack at some of those records. I wonder how many of them have been converted to digital. I mean, how many of them did they go and take the 24-track tapes and convert all those tracks to digital so that they're available? You know, some of that stuff was long ago that if we use a lot of Ampex 456, and some of those batches of Ampex 456 aren't good anymore. So if it's a 2-inch master and it's sitting there and it's been sitting there since 1986 or something, it may not be any good anymore and it may not be recoverable.
Yeah.
But if 10 years ago or 15 years ago they said, hey, you know, let's take those masters and convert them to digital so we have the digital files, if they thought ahead, and I actually have no idea how much of that was done. I would really be curious. It's something I'm curious about, because if they did do that, then there's the option to go back and remix some of that stuff, and that would be fun.
Yeah, I mean, knowing how even the best record labels, how disorganized and how they have a lack of ability to look into the future. Hence the internet being a surprise all those years ago. I don't think there's been too much digitizing done. There's many horror stories of things being lost, being destroyed, and it breaks my heart, really. All of the recordings that maybe could have been digitized at one point, and as you say, have unfortunately are on tapes that just aren't savable anymore.
Right.
I mean, that would have been amazing. And look, there's one person, I'm all over the map here, but going back to Peace Sells again, must have. The drumming performance on that album is just, for me, right up there with one of the best. Do you remember at all what it was like working with Gar at the time?
I do. He was incredible, and that was the thing. I think his drumming is the thing that makes that record so unique.
Yeah, because
he could go from one section to the next section, and it would be, you know, like a different feel and a different, maybe even a different time signature and a different tempo. And he would make that transition so musical. And I don't think you could play a whole lot of those songs. I don't think you could play to a click track. I don't think it would work. Or it would take a lot of time to make it work. But with Gar, he was able to make those transitions and go from one crazy feel to the next. And he was so original. I mean, he did stuff, and again, that has to do with him and Chris Poland coming from the fusion world. So, no, the drumming was unique, and I think makes that record what it is, because those live performances were exciting. When those guys went out and they were doing the tracking, I mean, it was, you know, it was mind-bending listening to those guys play and make those changes and do those crazy things they did, going from one field to the next, you know, so effortlessly and so musically. It was an astonishing thing, and we knew when we were in the studio, we knew that this was something really, really special.
And when you were, and how did you track them? Were you just taking the drums live and then everybody else on top, or were you trying to get as much live as possible?
We went back and fixed the bass. So we would go for the drum track. We were looking for the drum track. Although when those guys played, they were all so good. I mean, Poland and Dave Ellison, those guys are phenomenal players. You know, they didn't make a lot of mistakes. They were so tight. It was crazy. So, but anyway, no, we would go back and fix the bass and try to get it just so, and then all the guitars we would overdub and double track them and make the double tracks super tight. So all that stuff is double track guitars, and it's spot on, and that's why it's punchy too, because they could play so tight and do those double tracks so accurately. And so when they punch, you get that dynamic. It jumps off the record.
And what was it like? I mean, there's some incredible solo work by both Chris and Dave on there. What was it like working with Dave vocally? I'd be really interested to sort of see what that was like.
He was reluctantly the singer of the band. I think it just came down to it that they couldn't find a singer they liked, so they used Dave. And he was not as confident on that record as he became later. I mean, or accomplished with it. So he was a little bit unsteady, and he was easy to work with. I mean, he was fine to work with, but I think he knew that was kind of his weak spot. The songs were super strong, but I think he realized that his vocals at the time were kind of the if there was a weak link, that's what it was.
And that must have been, I mean, that really becomes almost like an exercise in psychology when you're dealing with somebody in a position like that, right? Because it's.
Yeah, but we got good performances.
You did
good performances out. I mean, he was, like I said, he was good to work with. He was, but we kind of knew that was kind of the weak spot. The real dynamic between me and Dave was that I was totally enamored with Chris Poland. I was totally blown away by his playing, and it just, seduced by it. I mean, the guy is extraordinary, and Dave said I had Polonitis. Like he had seen it before. He knew what this disease was. He'd seen it before. So, and I irritated him by being so enamored with Poland. I should have paid more attention to Dave.
Well,
to be honest with you.
Well, look, given the tales you hear about what they were like to work with back then, sounds like you got it. It sounds like you got it pretty easy.
Yeah, no. Well, it was kind of crazy. There were Gar and Chris were into heroin at the time. The other guys in the band were experimenting with it, but Gar and Chris were strung out. And there were a couple of days where when we first discovered this, that we found out we couldn't really get to work on a particular morning because those guys were sick, and we had to wait for them to find and score some drugs, and then we could go and track. And so that was a little weird to get used to. It was my first experience with heroin, in a band with heroin, and so that was a little bit trying. But it really didn't affect things that much, except that there were a couple of times where they didn't want to work until they got high, and then they get high, and then they go play, and it'd be great. So it was a little strange.
Yeah,
but I won't say it was like difficult or anything. It was just like we got started late a couple of days. That's the whole. That's from my point of view. That was the only effect.
Yeah, and sorry, go on.
And personality-wise, everybody was great to work with in the studio. Those guys were fantastic. It was great, including Dave.
Were you disappointed that you never got a chance to work on any future Megadeth recordings?
Yes, yeah, and there were a couple of reasons for that, but I think the biggest one is that I didn't really, I just didn't handle the things right with Dave. So personally, with Dave and I, it wasn't the right relationship.
Right.
I'll just leave it there.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. So it wasn't just the polonitis then.
Well, I think that was the core of it, but we didn't really connect. Whereas Chris and I became friends. It just didn't happen that way with Dave.
Right. Okay. And yeah. Well, like you said, let's leave it there. So when's you said you started working again? How long is it? How many years have you had off? What have you been up to?
I worked in computers. I worked in the computer industry, and I raised two boys. I have two adult sons that have both, gone off to do other things, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I was a parent, and I moved out of Hollywood, moved to Portland, Oregon, which was a good place to bring the kids. I didn't want my kids growing up in LA, and back in the early 90s, it was really dirty there. The air was terrible, and you could really damage your child's lungs by having them grow up near a freeway in LA. It was just, you just didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
So I moved them up to Portland, and that's pretty much it. Just worked in computers and done a whole bunch of different things, but software engineering, software architecture. The last thing I was into was doing DevOps, which is sort of automating the software development process.
Oh, right. So basically what happened was, whilst you were doing that, music, all music recording became computerized, and you spent years working in the computer industry. So it would seem like a kind of marriage made in heaven to come back to it, knowing what you know now.
Right, and I've done a little bit of I took a couple classes online to do digital signal processing. So basically, what happens inside your digital audio workstation when you're working with Pro Tools, and you stick your plug-in in there and you do something, I have a pretty good idea what's happening in there. I took some classes, and we did some DSP where we took sounds apart and used Fourier transforms to shift them from the time domain to the frequency domain, and then you muck with them, and then you put it back. And that's pretty much what happens in those plugins that are EQs and compressors and all that stuff. So
yeah,
it's something I'm still interested in, and I may pursue working with somebody that makes plugins.
Oh wow, that'd be I mean, I can assure you that your name is still carries a great deal of weight in the metal and the thrash community. And I've got a whole bunch of questions from subscribers here. So don't go anywhere. That's the end of the main interview. So I'm going to thank you for that. But I'm going to keep you for some questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And what that means is patrons get their own 25-minute podcast where they get to hear all of their questions answered by the great man himself. So if you want to have access to guests and to be able to ask them questions, all you need to do is tap the link that says support this podcast in the podcast description, and that will take you straight to Patreon. $5 a month, fill your boots. There is hundreds of posts already there that you can get stuck into, and you get all sorts of other bits and pieces as well. So feel free to sign up anytime you like. Anyway, that was so much fun. And I have to say that going on and doing the Patreon questions was great as well. But yeah, I mean, what a guy. he has worked on so many amazing fucking albums. It's untrue. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I didn't realise that he worked on the first Suicidals album, which is just incredible. I always associated with him, very much with metal. Well, peace sells, but who's buying for a start? But I'd completely forgotten that he was on that. So that's if I ever knew. I don't think I ever knew, to be honest. But it was a real trip down memory lane, just talking about albums that are so old but still ingrained on my memory, and I'm sure the memory of many of you as well. Things like Extreme Aggressions, when that came out, it was like, whoa, check out that production. And it's like, some people were like, oh, I don't know, it doesn't sound like Creator. And for me, it was just like, oh, this sounds like Creator Mark II. This is fucking brilliant. But just the way back in those days that a producer who actually understood thrash metal was absolutely key. And as you hear him say there, it's very much about the fact that he knew these bands knew how they wanted to sound, so he just helped them to sound how they wanted to sound. And I totally identify with that, because back in those early days, people just didn't know how to deal with it. And you'd kind of tell them to do things in the studio, and that's how we want it to sound. And you'd end up having arguments because they were like, well, no, things aren't done like that, and things shouldn't sound like that. And if it's metal and if it's rock, you put reverb on everything to make it sound big. And it's like, no, because the key to thrash is having it dry and, whatever. I'm rambling. But look, I hope you really enjoyed that. Just a quick hour there for you to spend time with Randy Burns between Christmas and New Year, or of course whenever you're listening to this. I'm saying that because this is when it's coming out, but as always, this could be listened to by anyone from anywhere at any time. And if that's you, well, welcome. This was a Christmas special from 2020. That's right, the year of the pandemic. That year that we all like to call a bag of cunts, basically. This year, what a sack of shit. What have we found out? We found out that some of our friends are complete fucking nut jobs and will believe anything. We've also found out that some of our friends are a little bit crazy. We've found out that some of our friends and family are really cool and have dealt with lockdown and all sorts really well, and others haven't. We found out how to exist through total and sheer boredom. We found out what it's like to exist on no money. We've also found out what it's like to realise that you have to wear a mask wherever you go. It's shit, but that's the way life is at the moment. So if you are listening to this well past the pandemic, believe you and me, it was every bit as shit as everybody tells you. It really fucking is. But we'll get through it. It could have been a lot worse. Personally, I've managed to, I've now been slightly touched by the virus, having lost a friend of a friend to COVID-19. 32 years old. 32 years old. No underlying health conditions, but the motherfucker just took him out. So look, I don't want that to happen to anybody, certainly not to anybody listening to this podcast. So please do take care of yourselves. Everybody, look after yourselves. 2021 should be a massive, massive improvement. So, to all of you listening to this, have a great Christmas, New Year, 2021, and I will speak to you again very soon.